So you can't
But that's why I was asking. I don't want to assume anything, I guess. We're getting ready for tomorrow. Or what? They always get like, they always seem to get that weather for them.
Dale, do you have your computer with you?
Don't.
There's about 8 permits I need approved.
I worked them all down to one, and the one I have a question
Oh,
on.
did you do that this morning?
Yeah,
Awesome, perfect, I'll look at
but,
it.
but that one I have a question on, so.
Okay,
It's like 3 permits in one, that's my question.
oh, I'll look at it. I'll go under your approvals and look at it.
That party must have been approved.
Mark, your name's over here.
Okay.
No, I didn't see that one, this was, these are,
Oh.
You want next one? You're on next one.
You might need it.
I probably will.
You don't think me, it's signature, right there.
I am.
Oh, I was gonna say,
It's not them
if
he's
you're
worried
a
about.
heathen like me,
Not really.
you don't have those guilty feelings.
Yeah, that's just a Catholic thing. My whole life.
You don't want to have one sugar.
Okay. Right.
You're looking a little peaky
You
right
don't
now.
have to take enough sugar, you'll be okay.
Anywhere in the audience?
You're in the audience? Okay. I guess I'm going back here. Oh, no.
It's like if you need to move like that.
Did you say it's fine?
No, I was on team, that's not appropriate. This is trying to tell me sex and boarding. Say that all the time, I say that all the time.
Yeah, I was the mom that places with him. I don't really care what he said. Greatly in front of us.
Have you also made your?
And if you
Actually,
ever
action
no
figure.
disrespect Yoshi by saying it, like, insinuating that.
What's with that?
Like,
He's
he's getting at me,
Every time you open.
then we'll have a
Scroll
problem.
through Facebook, there's 10 of
Tired of
them.
seeing it.
Everybody,
That's insane.
everybody's got themselves an action figure.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. I saw her
There's
like
two.
Conor McGregor one, I
There's
kind of
little-
chuckled.
It happens.
Like, he's wearing a
Like,
green
you can upload it.
We will put that together. She has yet to use it in public. At home, she's.
Very helpful, speeding up your work.
Go for it, Lance, I think you're on.
I need them.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. We'll get started here with our capital improvement plan workshop. It's a new process that we're trying with our CIP. I've been doing this process for many years now, and we always wanted to look for other ways to get council engaged and have a good discussion on these projects. It's such a lot of information, so trying to do this at the podium and really have a good discussion about these projects can be difficult. So the thought was this year is this type of setting would be more beneficial to council and the public so that we can have a good understanding of what these projects are. And in return, give us some direction on what you like, what you don't like, and then we can work through that as a team. So with that, I have a few introductory slides, and then we'll get to some of the department projects. So on our agenda today, we're going to talk real briefly about the history of our capital improvement plan. What is a capital improvement plan? Our process that we go through in putting this together. We'll talk about our current draft CIP and what some of those projects are, and then each individual department will have a discussion on what the projects are, and we can talk about those or move around or whatever council would like to do. So Minot has had a CIP for many, many decades. And the reason we put capital improvement plans together is to communicate our project needs with council and public. In the past, I've seen a very limited document similar to what we have here, but it's maybe a one-pager on each project. Then that evolved into a listing of projects in the back of the budget book at one time. And then that evolved a little bit into showing those projects in different categories and tables similar to how we have it today, but without all the background and narrative. And then about 2020, we completely scrapped that program and came up with something like we have today, where it's very detailed. This CIP is over 200 pages. It's pretty intense to put this together. We are the only city that goes to this level of a capital improvement plan, which I think is, it can be very good. It's very informative. If anybody wanted to look at a project, they can get a lot of detail. Most other cities are doing it how we used to do it, where it's a listing of projects. They might have a website on it. They'll have a brief discussion with their commissions, but that's about it. So I think the process that we're doing here is good and a lot of good information for us. So what is a capital improvement plan? Basically, there's different categories of projects that can be included in a CIP. So anything that is new infrastructure. So if we're going to extend a new utility or roadway someplace where there isn't a piece of infrastructure today, that's a capital improvement. All of the airport projects and equipment are listed in there, which you're probably wondering, well, why do we have equipment in there? FAA mandates that the airport has a capital improvement plan. So this is kind of a two birds with one stone type of approach, and put everything in airport in our current CIP. Any new buildings or major remodels, so like this building here that we're all in was in the CIP. If we're doing a re-roofing project somewhere, that's considered maintenance, and that wouldn't be included in the CIP. All of our special assessment projects would be listed in the CIP, and if we're going to do a reconstruction of existing infrastructure, like our 16th Street reconstruction or our 3rd Street reconstruction, those would be listed here. What's not included in the CIP are things like patching and sealing and mill and overlays, some of that maintenance work that we do, water main replacement, sewer replacement. Basically, if you're replacing one for one, then it's defined as a maintenance project, which is somewhat counterintuitive to us as engineers, but it meets the accounting definitions that are used, so that's how we put them together. So why do we go through this process? Like I mentioned, it's our way of communicating capital infrastructure needs to you, the council, and then also to the public. And maybe there's developers or other interested parties that want to know where we're extending infrastructure, because that helps them when it comes time to planning subdivision improvements. Obviously, this is a financial planning tool for the city's budget. Capital infrastructure projects are expensive. They take a lot of planning, and because of that level of detail, we need these as a financial tool so that we can plan for future budgets. And obviously, your approval as council helps us set the schedule for project development. We're constantly adjusting project timelines and different projects around so that we can coordinate projects. As for instance, there's a water main replacement in Southeast Minot. We have sidewalk improvements that we need to do, so we can try to pair those up wherever possible. And having a CIP in place helps different departments discuss those infrastructure needs and then coordinate the planning of those projects. So briefly, this process that we go through, we start with departments saying, well, I need a capital project. They develop a CIP worksheet. It's basically a spreadsheet that helps capture all the costs and different analysis that we go through that are ranked. Those projects are then sent to our finance department, and we review those together to make sure they're fundable. If we can't fund the project, well, then the project goes away. If we can, it might shift in years depending on when funds are available, but eventually those are included in the draft CIP, which you have in front of you. We tried to work on a logistics-based ranking criteria. That came in kind of late in our project and our process. We didn't want to deliver something that wasn't fully developed, so we paused on that, but we're going to come back and try that again next year and improve on that process. But in the future, that or something like it will be included in our process. Council will review the CIP, and that's basically where we're at today. And then eventually that goes in front of the public for comment at a council meeting, and then we prepare the final document based on whatever adjustments council wants to make. For the CIP spreadsheet processes that we put together, basically what we start with is we take reports and studies, and maybe it's from our federal partners, it's the availability of federal funding. We take all that information and we track that into this spreadsheet. That helps us develop the scope and cost and the timeline of this project. And then eventually that sheet is created, and we sit down with finance, with all of our different project worksheets, and we try to come up with funding sources where available. And then all those projects are then included in the draft capital improvement plan. So now I wanted to get into a summary of the document that we have in front of us today. So this is as submitted by the different departments. There's a total in this 5-year period from 2026 to 2030 of $955.2 million in infrastructure. You can see the majority of it is sitting in engineering and public works, primarily due to the flood control and public works, and then primarily due to some of the large transportation projects that we have in engineering. And then you can see kind of the different dollar spread of the other departments that have submitted projects. If you break this down by year, the whole goal of our CIP is to try, wherever possible, to level load the yearly expenditure of infrastructure projects. So we try to avoid having big swings where you might have, as an example, 50 million one year and 100 million the other, because it puts a lot of pressure on the budget, especially when you're trying to balance those things through. So wherever possible, we want departments to look at projects and then try to level those over the different 5-year periods. Obviously, that's difficult when you have a project like flood control, because depending on their phase, some phases are larger than others, and they have a big funding puzzle that they have to put together to make that work. In airport engineering, most of our projects are tied to some sort of federal funding, and so it just kind of depends on when you can get those federal funds. That's typically when your project will land. We look at the different funding sources that we use. They primarily come from a few different sources. Federal and state funds takes up the lion's share of all of our CIP funding. There's a big component of sales tax that we use, and that helps to pay for flood control and roads and all sorts of different types of projects. You'll see the tax levy that's put in there at this time. That's dedicated solely to the police department. No other projects in the CIP are funded with tax dollars or property tax dollars. We do very little amount of special assessing. 0.57% of our entire CIP is funded with specials at this time. And we have some storm sewer development funds that are used, and then revenue bonds. Those will be tied to a future wastewater treatment plant if that would come to fruition. You'll see a row there called Other. Those are typically funds from water and sewer reserves, or some sort of reserve account that the city has, and then those funds are brought into the CIP in that category. So in summary, like I had mentioned, the CIP, the phasing, and some of those projects are definitely tied to the progression of the flood control project. Almost 60% of the entire CIP's cost is tied up in that one project. All the other projects combined are just over 40%. Obviously, we know that that's an extremely large project, but it does have a lot of impact on our capital expenses. There's several projects that are inserted in the CIP for planning purposes that may or may not happen. A good example of that is our wastewater treatment plant that's at the end of the capital improvement plan. That is a population trigger or a effluent target that could be set by the federal government. If both of those targets aren't met, we don't have to build a wastewater treatment plant, but it's shown in there for planning purposes. Broadway reconstruction is another example that's in there for planning One thing to also keep in mind is we spend just over $15 million a year in infrastructure maintenance. So chip sealing, mill and overlays, utility replacements, all of that cost is in addition to the capital improvement plan. Because again, those are maintenance projects, they're not capital. And then lastly, our goal here today is to try to get an understanding from you as a council what projects you're interested in funding or moving or want to have more discussion about. Because we need this information for us as professional staff to start planning our work over the next several years. Even if a project isn't necessarily funded this year or next year, if we know that council is in favor of a certain project, that helps us plan other projects around that might have to tie into it. As for instance, on our 3rd Street reconstruction that's currently under design, we kept pushing that project into the future because it's tied into flood control. We have to drain that roadway, and we can't drain the roadway without the pipes that MI6 would provide. So a lot of these projects are tied to each other. And so we know if council's in support of a project, then we start doing that planning with maybe other projects that could have an impact or a traffic impact. We don't want to try to close down too many north, south, east, west roads at one time. So where we can, we try to space some of that work out. So that was my introduction. What we plan on doing now is having each department go through their list of projects. We can get as detailed as you want. We can keep it high level. But the whole point is to try to get you the information you need to make decisions. Like I mentioned before, it's hard to do that at the podium. It just mechanically doesn't work as well. So this setting was more important for us to do that. So if anybody has any initial questions, I'm going to start with A at the year report.
So just one. Okay, just one quick thing, Lance. So are you looking for decisions out of this meeting, or are you going to bring a list of them that will approve at a council meeting, or how are we going about this?
So what I would like to see is some input and dialogue from council. So if you as council say, Department X, we are not funding this project, then our staff can take that project out of the draft CIP. We will come back then with basically a final draft, and we will present that at a council meeting, where council could then approve it at a public meeting with public input. That's what we'd like to see. If we're not prepared to do that today, then we can certainly bring back more information or work through that in some other method. But I think the end of the day is our finance department, for sure for the 26 and 7 projects where they're coming in short order, we probably need to make some decisions quickly so they can start the budget process.
Okay, so just a point of order for the council then. I mean, that sounds to me like motions being brought and decisions being made by the council today, which legally we have city attorney's office here. Are we okay with that? We've got a quorum. I don't see any issue why we would have an issue, but for me it gets a little into how the meetings run, because if we're bringing motions and voting on those motions, we have to kind of know how we're going to go about that.
If I can just add on to that a little bit, maybe a little bit different perspective, that maybe today what we're looking for is priorities. Because then we have to sift through that and figure out what we can fund of those priorities. So, I mean, in theory, we would always start with the most important or highest priority projects and work our way down with what we can fund. And like Lance said, sometimes we have a high priority project that we have to wait on because we have other things that have to come into place before we can fund them. But I think that's what we really have to kind of look at now. What is the priority and what's the level of that project that we need to get to, so we know what we have to try to fund and how we need to fit that into the budget.
Okay. And I guess the way that I'm looking at it is, surprise, surprise, I may have completely different thoughts than the other council members. I can certainly say those, and I will throughout, but that's a different thing than the consensus of the council saying, don't buy land for a fire department, right? I mean, those are two different things. I don't know if some discussion and input gives you guys what you need, or if you need a motion that says remove, add, prioritize this.
I'm comfortable either way. I think the biggest thing that we're trying to accomplish is as much as we can, we as staff want to be on the same page as the city council as far as funding priorities and project priorities. I think that's what we're looking for. I don't necessarily need you shall remove, but if the discussion from council is this isn't a high priority for us, maybe we should move that to the back of the CIP, or we're just not interested in funding this project. I think that general direction would be helpful for us.
Other council members, are you comfortable? I mean, maybe I'm the only one that's uncomfortable here.
I'm fine with what I think we can provide direction, and then I think we can provide direction, and staff can, again, take those factors like Dave said. Some of these, we might prioritize something, but we want it done sooner rather than later, or prioritize it over another project, but it makes sense logistically that it's gonna be 4 years out, 5 years out for some of those projects. So I don't know if making a motion, it might be counterproductive, because it might end up contradicting itself when it comes to actually prioritizing these things with timelines.
Yeah, and we can see how it goes. I mean, if legally we're okay to make actual decisions and a motion is warranted, we can do it at that point. Make sense? Okay.
City manager, maybe if I can weigh in. The intent of today's meeting is to be more informal. Again, provide direction to staff. So even if you're making motions and providing directions, I don't think those are final, because I think you still need to go through the public hearing process in the public, because depending on what decisions you're making and what you're prioritizing today, the public may not agree with that. And when they come forward and speak in the public hearing, council may choose to change its mind. And you'll make that final decision with regards to the CIP and what's in and what's out at a regular council meeting in front of the public. So again, today is just meant to be an opportunity to, one, provide the council more specific information, detailed information that you need to help you make your prioritization decisions. And then if the council does have some consensus with regards to where you're falling with those priorities, or at least be able to provide some guidance to staff, we can begin to prepare that in expectation that, knowing that that is potentially subject to change after public input and what the council decides to do at the final, if that makes sense.
And just for clarification, you are free to proceed with a motion or not. I mean, it's up to you guys how you want this to go today.
Okay. With that, I brought up the airports projects, and Jennifer's is gonna start walking through those, and I'm just gonna kind of scroll along so everyone can see, and those online can see as well.
All right. Like Lance had mentioned earlier, the airport includes things that would typically fall under a maintenance budget or an equipment budget. But because I have to provide what's called airport CIP to the FAA and also to the North Dakota Aeronautics Commission, and they want to see all the projects that they anticipate planning on funding included in our airport CIP. I've included them in this CIP, so that includes, as you see at the very top of the list, crack sealing and painting. Crack sealing and painting is something we do every year, typically.
I don't know if the mic's on. Do we have to hold the buttons? Because I see that. I think the lights are going out after a little while.
Sorry about that. Okay.
I'll watch it.
You watch it, and you watch me. And so the crack sealing is something we typically do every year, but when we go into the actual sheet on it, you can see that 50% of crack sealing is typically covered by the state North Dakota Aeronautics Commission, and that's why it was included in the airport CIP. Crack sealing is for the runways, taxiways, and this also includes some of our landside projects too. The next project is our GA Access Road and Rehabilitation Phase 2. We're planning on this summer doing Phase 1, which is the orange. This is backwards. Sorry, the image is backwards from what we're planning. So the orange Phase 2 is what we're planning on doing this summer. And then in 2026, it will be the blue blue section on the north side of that roadway that is parallels Broadway over there, goes in front of Fire Station 3, Avflight, Minot Arrow, and a couple of other businesses that are just off of Broadway there. The next project down is runway 826 and taxiway Bravo. This project is a very large project. Runway 826, the pavement is on the verge of failing. And we're going to switch sides with this speaker here. Okay, so runway 826, the pavement on 826 is on the verge of failing, and so that pavement needs a rehabilitation. We're going to do a mill and overlay of that runway, try to catch it before it needs a full reconstruction. And in addition to that, taxiway Bravo, which is kind of the purple area on the image, currently does not meet FAA standards because it does not line up to the runway at a 90-degree angle. And so the project includes realigning taxiway Bravo so it meets current FAA design standards. The next project on the list is we have a broom truck. This is a larger broom truck than you see on the streets or the highways. This is so that we can get our runway open as quickly as possible if we have certain weather conditions. We currently have a broom truck that I can't remember what year it is, but it is due for replacement. It's been part of what's called a passenger facility charge project on the books. It was supposed to be replaced back, I think, 2 years ago now. So it's time to do that replacement of that particular broom truck. Keep in mind, right now, the estimated timeline for any vehicle purchases of this nature are taking up to 600 days from purchase to delivery date. So there used to be a number of companies in the U.S. that would make these pieces of equipment, and it's recently Oshkosh was bought out by NB, so we're getting limited companies that can build these types of equipment. The Terminal Roadway Improvement Phase 2. So we did a roadway study with the help of our city street department planners. The terminal roadway has quite a bit of issues, especially when we have 3 flights coming in at the same time. It has caused issues where we've had a medical alert and our emergency responders have had to drive backwards on the road in order to access the terminal. And so through this study, we're looking at different ways to improve that frontage road that goes right in front of the terminal, the drop-off zones and things like that. So the terminal security door repairs, I don't know, I think most of you may have been on the tour where I talked about the security doors and how we were kind of, for lack of a better term, Frankensteining them. We're stealing parts from doors that work to repair these doors. We need to replace these doors. We have at least 5 doors at about $20,000 a piece that need to be replaced and repaired. These are also, most of these doors that are on this list are also emergency exits. So if there's a fire in the terminal, these are the doors that the passengers should take to get out of the building. The next project is the T-hanger replacement. We have 2 sets of T-hangers up on the north side, just off of Broadway. The one indicated here has some severe heaving and structural issues with the base of it, and it needs replacing. And so, actually, both sets need replacing, but the cost of it's cost prohibitive to do both at one time. So we're going to start with the one on the south side that's in worse condition. This will be funded through what's remaining of the AIG bill grants funding from the FAA. crack ceiling again, I'm not gonna go over that, that's just a different year. We do have a need for a new mower attachment for our mower. We are required by the FAA to maintain the grass at certain height levels so it doesn't attract birds and wildlife through our wildlife plan. And one way to do it is we cut the grass to a certain height that keeps certain species of birds away from the airfield. So the follow-on project is just a continuation of runway 826 taxiway Bravo. So this is a multiple phase, multiple year project. Same notes as before. We have a need for a new small front-end loader with a blower. This would be small enough to get in between the gates up at the terminal. Our current blower and front-end loaders are a little bit large. They're not quite, they can't get into the nooks and crannies around the terminal building and other smaller areas. So. The next one on the list is the airport master plan and airport layout plan update. The master plan per the FAA is kind of our Bible of projects, and we need to update it every 10 years. 2028 is our 10-year time frame to do our major update to our airport master plan. The FAA will not fund a project if it's not on our master plan and in our ALP. So most of the projects listed in the airport master plan have been completed or will have been completed by 2028. Taxiway Alpha reconstruction. That is the taxiway that goes off the end of our primary runway and goes up to the museum space and the National Guards area up there. Typically, this taxiway is currently failed pavement, considered failed pavement. Typically, this taxiway gets very limited use, but in the summertime, we are now working with Public Works, and the spray pilots are the mosquito spraying operation does use this space up here because it can be quarantined off for the C-130, I think it is. They bring in the spray hops in, so this is the location that we do the mosquito spraying hops out of. Taxiway Delta, reconstruction and widening. So taxiway Delta, it goes up to our crosswind runway. It's our smaller runway used by our spray pilots and our general aviation traffic primarily. But our commercial operators do use it occasionally. This pavement is also, especially at the kind of the curve at the end, is on the verge of failing also. The next project on the list is the aircraft fueling apron. So currently we have a taxiway Foxtrot. So taxiway Foxtrot is over on our south side of the airport. The fueling apron is for a future self-serve fueling location for pilots who utilize the south side. Currently on the south side we have Civil Air Patrol is down there. We have a couple of private hangar owners, and just today we had an individual who came into our office requesting more information about building a couple sets of T hangars down on the south side. The Wildlife Hazard Management Plan update. We are currently doing a huge wetland and drainage project at the airport. The Wildlife Hazard Management Plan needs to be also updated every 10 years. And we're actually holding off. It's due, I think it was due this year or next year. We're gonna hold off until the wetland project that we're currently doing this year is kind of settled, the grass is growing, that kind of stuff, and then we'll do the assessment. And these assessments to create this plan or a year-long assessment. So basically, someone from U.S. Department of Agriculture or U.S. Wildlife comes out and counts the number of birds he sees all year round. So once a month, he comes out and does daytime and nighttime observations of the wildlife at the airport. The next one is, I think I have it on here twice. It must be a multi-year. So once again, taxiway alpha. So the first year is the design, the second year is the construction. Taxiway delta is the same thing. Taxiway foxtrot, same thing. And that's it. Questions, comments, concerns?
Just one, and I don't know if it'll be just on your side, so throughout all those where we talk about airport reserves, is it truly excess funds from all of the funding sources? How do we end up with reserves there in the overall funding scheme we have for the airport?
Well, it depends on the reserve that's being used, because some of the projects, like the terminal roadway, we can pull from, there's a reserve fund for CFCs, the car rental, anytime somebody rents a car, there's a certain dollar amount that's tagged onto the daily rental, and that dollar amount goes into a reserve fund to make infrastructure repairs or things mostly associated with the car rentals, but the way our lease agreement is written, we can use it for other operational maintenance needs too.
And so then is it the best way to think of it that any of those reserves usually will constitute local match? Is that?
Yes.
Because the FAA and the state funds are taking up a lot and we've got to have our inputs,
Yep.
correct?
So our local
Real quick, Mike, when you're done talking, you gotta push the button. No. Only one at a time.
There you go.
There we go. Our local match is currently the way the FAA, if it's an FAA eligible project, the local match is currently right now 95% federal, 5% local. Of that local, typically it's 50% the state will pay, so 2.5% from the state, 2.5% from our reserves. That is a recent change. It used to be 90% federal and 10% local, with 5 and 5 between the state and the city. Other projects like the crack sealing, the feds will not pay for crack sealing. They won't pay for that type of maintenance. So that is a 50-50. And then other projects the state has determined are critically necessary for the aviation infrastructure, and they'll fund them 90% by the state, 10% local. Yes?
See, I'm working, all right. So some of these projects have been on for a number of years.
Yes.
And they haven't been funded. So how long do they stay on? Like, when do we determine that, yes, we're gonna fund it, or no, it's just gonna go away?
So the projects that are shown in the CIP are projects that council's prioritized. They're in some level of design, some of them. So like I'll keep going back to 3rd Street because it's a multi-year project. So in this year's budget, there's dollars in there for engineering. But then the construction is listed a couple years later when the federal funds would then come into the project. If the project is constructed and say the 25 budget, you won't see the project anymore unless it has a subsequent phase later on in the CIP that would be within the date range.
So I guess, we'll talk about security doors, because security doors have been an issue that we've heard about for the last couple of years. It seems like something that we need to fund. Again, how long does that stay on here until we get that task accomplished?
The doors themselves specifically have fallen off last year's budget, this year's budget, because we had other infrastructure critical things like a fuel farm that broke down last winter. So then we just commandeered those dollars and said, we will make do with the broken doors for another year and other things like that. So we do a BA that you guys approve that moved that money out of repairing the doors and moved it into repairing the broken fuel farm or installing the security exit lane, things like that. So that's why it's back again.
Okay.
It's like the penny that never goes away.
Any other questions for airport?
I'm just gonna add one bit to Lisa's just on context. From my experience, working in the Air Force and the Army over a number of years, if it's a priority, it's a priority. You know, when we used to fight for things at different locations, and I'm sure the wing commanders are doing it out here at Minot Air Force Base, there are things that the current wing commander's priority is that wing commanders 5, 6, 8 years ago put on the list. And to keep it is sometimes persistence. I mean, if it's a good project, it's persistence because there's a limited amount of, even if the federal government, it may not seem like it sometimes, but there's limited amount of funds, right? So for a multi-million, $50, $60 million type of military construction project, it better stay your number one priority, or that's an easy one for them to cut of the Pentagon or even Congress.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, we'll jump into my world here in engineering. So one of the first projects that we have up is our traffic signal highway safety improvement project. This is a DOT project that we have federal funds or local funds involved with. They're still working on a final estimate. So what you're seeing here is the estimated cost when this was city-led. So our projected cost is probably going to drop quite a bit. But we haven't got that final cost. This will add safety improvements to all of our traffic signals around town, pedestrian countdown timers, no turn on reds or when there's a pedestrian actuated signal. So safety improvement should be constructed here in 26. Also in 2026 is going to be the 16th Street Interchange Rehabilitation Project. We haven't really done any major maintenance on the interchange since it was built in 1987. We're going to diamond grind all the pavement, replace cracked panels, give that thing a smooth ride again. It needs a deck overlay, so we'll be putting a concrete deck overlay on it. We're going to fix those approach slabs that have all failed, and then we'll have new traffic signals that are federally funded. So we'll have 3 come off of our maintenance list. We have traffic signal replacements continuing on for the next 5 years. Stefan has done a good job at basically developing a mini CIP for our traffic signal needs. We're getting towards the end of that list, so in about 5 years we'll have all the traffic signals that are not on a future projected DOT project upgraded or replaced. And then we'll be down to maybe a more typical maintenance cycle. So it's been a lot of expensive improvements over the years, but up until the last probably 5, 8 years, we've done almost no traffic signal replacements other than like a reconstruction project.
So Lance, one quick thing on that while we're right on it, and Stefan, I've kind of said the same thing to you over time. As we go through each of these, whenever we're replacing one, are we looking at whether a roundabout can work, whether there's other options? I would think a lot of times that's based on a rebuild of the roadway as well. So there's a lot that goes into that, but is that part of the equation right now?
Alderman Blessum, anytime we do a traffic signal replacement, we are required to do a warrant analysis. So first step is making sure the signal's warranted, right? So you've seen us take out a handful of signals over the past few years. They didn't meet warrants, so then we're not allowed to put that signal back in. We'll also take the opportunity to look at if there's other improvements that could be done. A lot of times where we're replacing these traffic signals, we're really confined on right-of-way, right? So we would wait until a reconstruction project would be programmed with federal funds. We do a full-blown traffic study and then look for opportunities to put in roundabouts or other types of intersections that would require signal. Good question. Next project is in 2028. We have another highway safety improvement. This is really geared towards putting some speed notification signs up on some of our more, I guess, rural or roads that have a high frequency of speeding, just to try to give some feedback to drivers like, hey, you're going too fast, try to slow down. So that'll be funded with primarily federal funds. In 2026 would come the engineering for the last phase of the 16th Street reconstruct, and then the actual reconstruction itself in 2028. This will be the second part of that project. The first part here will kick off in the next couple of weeks. 3rd Street Bridge replacement. So this is not the bridge replacement. What this is the preliminary engineering study to tell us essentially what kind of bridge would we need, how would we work with the railroad during this, are there any right-of-way impacts, what's this cost going to be, because we need a document then that will give us some answers to questions so that we can start shopping for other funding opportunities like a federal grant. Or worst case scenario, if we had to program that through our existing transportation funds. It's going to take several years to put a project of this size together. And so this is kind of our first step at trying to get that programmed. I put in a request to the DOT for federal funding, so that'd be like an 80-20 match. We're also looking at flex funds when that program comes out to try to get some state funds to pay for that engineering. So right now, we plan on programming our local cost share into the 26 budget, and then hoping that that federal funding does come along. We asked for it out of order, so I don't know if we'll get it, but we've been working with DOT, and hopefully that'll come through for us.
So Lance, can you talk about it a little bit more for just a minute here? Because to me, it feels a little like just $1 million zillion, right? It's like just way more than any of us can even fathom what it'll be. Hopefully their share, all that stuff. But is right now is the thought to replace it more or less as is? I mean, obviously it'd be updated engineering, it'd be updated to what we do today. But is there thought to other options? Is there thought to staying on the ground and going across the river at ground level? And are there other thoughts in the engineering of this that you guys will be going through as you do this?
Alderman Blessing, that's why you do this preliminary engineering study, right? Because it looks at all the different options that may be available. You know, we have to cross a river, we have to cross the railroad. Those each come with their own challenges. Likely what's going to drive this project is what the railroad says we can and can't do, right? So they're going to dictate heights and pier locations. Floodplains will help dictate pier locations. And then we have to see how this project fits in with our overall transportation network. We only have so many north-south routes, and those routes are connected to other federal routes, and all this traffic has to work together. So if we would say, maybe one of the options is, well, don't replace it at all, we'd have to make sure that our other routes can accommodate the 8,500 vehicles a day that would go over that bridge, and then what those impacts may be to our other arterials. So all of that would be reviewed as part of this preliminary engineering process.
Okay, so the way that you just described that though, it sounds like we're already down a path that says we're gonna need to go above ground. We're not able to stay on ground level and go across that way.
Alderman, I do not believe that the railroad would allow us to have an at-grade crossing. They would likely say either build over us, under us, or you don't build anything at all across our tracks is likely what they're going to say. But until we get in that conversation with them, we're under the assumption right now that we have to essentially remove and replace what we have.
And if I could, I guess, just for the rest of the council, I mean, to me, this is one of the bigger things we have looming out there. And for me, it doesn't feel okay to just say rebuild it no matter what it costs, because that's a little where we're being backed into a corner on right now. So, you know, if I'm given that choice, I might be looking stronger at what are the ramifications of not having it. We went for a year or whatever it was, right, without it. We've got another bridge that crosses both the river and the tracks about 4 blocks to the west. And I think we have to really give it serious consideration whether this is the right path. Now, if it's a 80-20 or 90-10 cost share, I guess then we take a look at it. I mean, you know, I know there's a lot of people that look at federal funds as not really coming from our pockets, but inflation does, so we don't have to think of that as well. But to me, I'm hoping that there are other options that are available to us than just rebuilding it. You know, in future dollars could be $80 million or something along those lines, so we're gonna have that coming in front of us.
In 2028, the DOT is planning to upgrade 88 pedestrian ramps vertic all the way to 20th Avenue. This is part of their ADA transition plan, so we would have a 10% cost share in that. So that project is just kicking off into design. This is one of those projects I talked about that is shown essentially for planning purposes, and that's kind of just right now what it is. In 28, the DOT is going to start preliminary engineering on a South Broadway reconstruction. And so that's the process they go through to help identify what the options are, what the cost estimates are, potentially phasing. We're not going to rebuild this much pavement in one construction season. It's likely going to be spread over many, many years, just like the other Broadway reconstruction phases were. So to be conservative at this point, because we just don't know when certain phases may hit, the earliest this project would probably go is 2030. And so we've taken our current estimate and put those costs into the 2030 CIP. However, as I stated there, it's likely going to be broken up into many phases. So then our local cost match would then be broken up into many phases over like several years.
Lance, before you move on now, has there been any conversations with the MPO director on funding availability, planning funding through them, with it being a major corridor? And I'm assuming this is on the federal aid route map.
So this preliminary engineering project was requested before the MPO was created. So while the MPO will be involved in the planning and the discussion, these were pre-MPO dollars that were programmed by the DOT at our request. The 11th Avenue sidewalk, this is a mandatory project that we have to do. Anytime we replat land within the city, the current ordinance is that we have 5 years to install and unison sidewalks. So this project here was moved at the 5-year mark so that we're compliant with our ordinance, but at the same time gives us funding flexibility. This is also an area in about the same timeline where 11th Avenue would have a water main replacement, so we're trying to look at how do we coordinate those projects and potentially construct them together, or at the very least, while the road's closed down, that would be the time to install the sidewalk. And then in 27 and 28, this is the actually initial phase of that sidewalk project on 16th Avenue. This would complete the sidewalk network through the city property there, connecting to the existing trail. Same thing, we're required to put the sidewalk in as part of our ordinance. We have a potential lighting district here on North Broadway. This is right adjacent to the airport. We have several old poles like this. When they start to rust out, they're susceptible to coming down in the wind, just like a traffic signal. So at this point, we're planning to set this up as a special assessment, following the same process that we used for the previous lighting district here in West Minot. Here's the 3rd Street reconstruction. So we have just started the design process on this project. Phase 1 is planned to be reconstructed in 2027, tying on to basically the improvements that flood control is going to stub for us. And then the second phase, if council elects to move forward with that, has nothing to do with this 2029. And right now we're funding this with a DOT grant program called Urban Grant. We would have to apply for that second phase of funding. So likely this fall, when the solicitations go out, we'd come in front of council to see if you're willing to fund the next phase of this project, which would basically be from 2nd Avenue South to 5th Avenue. We have a Safe Routes to School project planned for construction in '26. Our staff is just about to design this project. We were awarded this grant here, I think, earlier last year. The 21st Avenue sidewalk project, this has been probably one of the most requested projects by citizens of Minot. This would be right in front of the Optimus Soccer Complex. There's a missing segment of sidewalk there from 9th Street all the way over to 16th. Phase 1 would install the sidewalk improvements right adjacent to the soccer complex, and then construct a sidewalk with likely a flashing beacon to get pedestrians across that roadway. We are also looking at other potential improvements on 21st Avenue as part of maybe like a future chip seal project or something to try to clean up some of the lanes. It goes from 2 to 4 to 3 and then back to 2. So, if you're driving that corridor, it's very inconsistent. So as part of our transportation plan, we're looking at that. And then as part of our internal process, we'll look at what the best lane configuration is for that to try to clean that up a little bit. We're also looking at a potential slope stability project on Hiawatha. If you've driven that roadway lately, it's almost completely vertical on part of it, and it's eroding pretty bad. So there's a couple different options that we can do. The option that I have preliminarily put in the capital improvement plan would be to actually slope the hill back. I think there'd be one property acquisition that we'd have to do, but it's going to be significantly cheaper than a retaining wall project. So step 1 would be probably in 2028, trying to get some geotechnical engineering done, and really what that geotech engineering does, it tells us what the best method would be to do this improvement. It may be where sloping it back is going to be just fine. It may be where there's other things we can do that are more cost effective. But at this point, just because we don't have any information, we've done some preliminary takeoffs as to what this would cost. Throughout the city, there's different streetlight feed point cabinets. Some are in great shape, many are not. And so what we do with these is we dedicate some sales tax dollars to replacing these throughout the city. In addition, what Stefan and the team do is they look at areas where we can tie together neighborhood street lighting so that we can actually eliminate feed points. So we might put in a new electrical feed point, but then we can take and eliminate 2 or 3 that they might be only serving 1 or 2 lights. It might have been an extension of a lighting phase at one point. But we can, now that we're going to LEDs, those are much more efficient. The power draw is a lot less. So we can actually loop some of these street lights together and feed them with 1 instead of 3 feed points. Ann Street Bridge is listed in the capital improvement plan. Engineering was started in 2027 with a 2030 construction. This project has been directed by council to leave it in the CIP. However, the direction of staff was we don't want to use any local funding to replace it. So at this point, the bridge is listed in there, but it's 100% federal funds. I'll tell you, there's almost no grant sources out there for 100% federal funding. And that's probably going to be more so the case here in the coming years.
That's real quick on that one. This was before I was on council, and sadly, it's one of the few things I know very little about. Is it a pedestrian bridge as it was before? Is that the idea?
Yes, it would be a pedestrian bridge. We would replace it with a bridge that's probably not as complicated as the one that's there today. However, the main cost is going to be constructing the switchbacks that are needed to make it ADA accessible. So the bridge would actually become significantly shorter. Basically, we'd have to span the railroad right away, and then we'd have a set of switchbacks that are compliant with ADA standards, so you can get disabled folks up to the top of the bridge, over and then back down, and then you would use the Victoria Bridge. That's the metal one that goes over the river by Home Sweet Home. they use that to get across the river and then over to the openings that we have in the flow. Another bridge project, our Eastwood Park Bridge is, it's a pedestrian-only bridge, used to be a traffic bridge for 6th Street, closed many years ago. What this project is just starting the preliminary engineering on what we need to do to make sure this bridge remains in service and safe. If you walk underneath it, there's a lot of concrete spall going on and exposed rebar. So step one is having somebody just look at this bridge and make sure that can hold up its own weight. And then over time, as funding would allow, we'd have a cost estimate that we could go and try to shop for some federal grants. This one probably has a higher success rate of that just because of its historic nature. But until we do some preliminary engineering, we really don't know what's all ailing with it or what that cost is going to be. So some of these costs that I have in here right now are just simply placeholders because we just don't have any good understanding of what an improvement may or may not cost. Over time, we've been starting to convert all of our city streetlights over to LED. The electrical savings on this is generally between 55 and 66%, depending on the type of bulb that's put in the wattage. So this would be a continuation of using sales tax to upgrade LED lights wherever we can. In 2029, we have a project that's shown here right now that's 100% special assessed. It's been on the CIP for many years. It just hasn't moved forward yet. It's really working with the school and some of the surrounding property owners to complete these missing segments of street on 17th and 18th Avenue, especially now that 18th Avenue connects over to 20th. It'd be good for us to try to connect these neighborhoods together to get good traffic flow for not only for people dropping kids off at schools, but neighborhood traffic and emergency services over time. Because they're local roadways, we're not allowed to use federal funds or some of those other things, so we're really limited to something like a sales tax or a special assessment. So at this time, it's a very low priority, but it's shown in the CIP as a potential assessment. Getting towards the end here, sorry, I got a lot of planned projects that could move forward if we wanted to. Our City Hall site improvements, so there's several things that when we constructed this project that got pushed kind of towards the future. Some of those things would include rebuilding the parking lot, that's original pavement. It's starting to get tough to maintain. The street lighting, or excuse me, the parking lot lighting that's out there now is getting to end of life. Public Works has had to put some dollars and time into keeping that system up and running. And then if you ever looked at the railing that's on top of the retaining wall, if you went up to it and pushed on it real hard today, it would come crashing down the street. There's not much left of that. So that and then just the facade around the building is starting to show signs of wear. Kind of that wash rock facing that's on there. So while this project is shown on here, it doesn't score high in our criteria, but it's kind of one of those things where it's kind of like home ownership. Over time, you got to invest in keep your home up to date, and that's basically what this project is. It can be broken up into many phases. It can be prioritized, but my goal was to try to take some of these site needs, put them all in one project so that we could at least have a discussion and see where we wanted to go with this. And that's why it's at the end of the CIP. Same with this project here, the 2nd Avenue and Main Street Pocket Park. We did a placemaking study here not too long ago that identified some placemaking opportunities within the city. I put it in my capital improvement plan just because it probably fit there the best. However, it doesn't score very high just because it's not a really infrastructure project, it's more of a quality of life project. So that project is available in the CIP if council wants to review it, fund it, move it. but it would be right here at 2nd Avenue and Main Street. This would also include a set of stairs that would get you from street level up to City Hall instead of having to walk around the block. So there's a couple different components to it. And that's it. That is my list. Happy to take any questions that you may have, Council. Thank you. Fire Department.
Hello. The first project is a additional station on the south side of town with Trinity. We've seen a lot of growth on the south side. You can see we have a 4-minute as well as a 5-minute time frame right there. In the different colors, the brighter green is the 4-minute and the duller green is a 5-minute response time. A lot of the south end is outside of those parameters and it's taking us a long time, especially to get to the country club area. Thank you. So we'd like to move Station 1, which is headquarters station, down to the south side. We've looked at different properties. I've done presentations on the different properties, but I'd like to be able to secure, in 26 I have in the budget to secure the land. The land is very expensive and it's just going to keep going up in that area. And there's been some discussion on buying land for not only the fire department but also the police department, because if we're going to build a new police department, buying the land altogether, we can cost share many of the pieces of the facility, but sharing the HVAC and those types of things would be a benefit. So that's the first thing, is determining which direction to go there. We need a satellite station, and then I don't know where to move administration. We don't need to go with it, right away. We could phase it, depending on funding, but that is the first project. The next two projects are additions, because if we move forward with the staffing plan as I presented, we don't have enough bedrooms. So it's kind of a, if we get the staffing, then I would need those. So that's what the second two projects are, is adding an additional bedroom upfit. That one is just a shelled out bedroom at Station 4. Station 3 would need a full bedroom added on. When we remodeled the station, we did leave room in case we needed to add on an additional bedroom, so there is room there, but it is a brick exterior, so that's why the expensive bedroom. That is one expensive bedroom. And the final project is a classroom at the training center. Right now we have 2 old classrooms that were procured a while ago. Yeah, the portable classrooms. We have 2 of them. One is for Minot Rural, one is ours. We did a little remodel of the inside, basically put lipstick on a pig over COVID, but the bathroom facilities are really bad out there, and we really do need a better classroom facility. That project, there has been interest in cost sharing from Minot Rural to do a 50-50 cost share, but that would be something I would have to work through their board with a nod to move forward with that project from council. So those are the 4 projects that we have in the queue. Is there any questions? I don't like that look, sir.
I have lots of questions, but that's, and I mean, so let's start here, Chief Kelly. What if we were to go to a South End Fire Department, which, by the way, I'm relatively sympathetic to. I mean, that's where our growth is. We got to make sure we've got the right coverage there. It's unfortunate that we're going to have to spend a bunch of money to make that happen. What are the first thoughts with repurposing current Station 1?
First thoughts is, I guess, doing a master plan of the city. What are the needs? And I know the police department, if they stay in the current facility, they still have need for additional space. Could that additional space from the station be utilized for that? Could they put special ops there? Could they build, records? I don't know what, that's beyond my capabilities of knowing if that would fit them, but I could potentially do that. I could potentially leave administration there. And if they had that piece, all I need is that front area for administration. Maybe administration moves, City Manager Stewart brought up, well, there's a section here that could potentially be where fire administration works through. There's a lot of things, but I think we just have to sit down at the table and master plan it all out. The biggest thing is getting the fire crew down there and being able to provide a quicker service.
And I think that's great. You're kind of reading my mind, because that's actually where my mind went with special ops moving there. Because part of what we're talking about with the current police station is that there is needed space, and that's one part of it that could be a really good fit. And so, I may be able to get my mind to the point where that transition all makes sense, because I think long-term, we're gonna need that station on the south end. And as you mentioned, getting the land taken care of is probably a smart thing for us to do relatively soon, so that we can start getting that plan in motion and headed that direction.
Chica, when you're talking about a portable, or the portables that are there, are you thinking replacing it with a newer portable? Are you thinking stick built? Are you thinking, what would we?
In all honesty, in the fire code, portables are temporary structures. They are not supposed to be meant long-term. They need to be gone, probably sooner than later, if we can.
And I'll follow up. Is it imperative that the classroom be at the training facility? Obviously, for logistics, it probably makes sense, but is there any benefit to having it somewhere else?
They utilize the training center classroom because they'll go in and they'll do classroom time, and then they'll go out and do the hands-on pieces. So it's nice to have that out there. We use it, Minot Rural uses it, the bomb squad will use it out there, the SWAT team uses the classroom. There's a lot of different areas that use that facility, so it's nice to have that proximity.
Okay, let's head to the police department. Captain,
Okay, so the police department's only got one in that capital improvement plan, is that's a new building. The EAPC study that was done, must have been in 2022 or 2023, came up with two main options, remodel option and a new building option. Obviously, the new building option they both come with a hefty price tag. We don't have a funding source right now for that. So in the last, we're well aware that there's a lot more options on the table than the ones that the EAPC came out with. So to that respect, we're looking for guidance from the council, and it's my understanding in May the council's going to take that on. So we're waiting for a little more guidance in determine where we're going to go with this. But we want something on a plan of some sort, whether it's going to be a down the road item. We have plans to utilize the building that we're currently in the meantime, but we're just looking for something on the CIP.
Okay. So Dale, based on what we were just talking about with fire chief, is what do you think of the idea of having special ops at Fire Station 1, where it currently is today?
So I think that's a great option. I mean, that facility would be a great option for us to store our vehicles and to actually train out of. So I would definitely be for that option.
So if I can continue, go ahead. So with that in mind then, Chief, where my mind goes, and this kind of starts to get that whole discussion going, I think, because where my mind goes now, if we look at the graph that's on the screen, we're taking care of special ops in that scenario. We've got other options we've looked at and are looking at for the court which I think we just need to work our way through. So that removes one whole portion of it. Then we're really working within the constraints of the current building, or at least the current site. You know, there's still the option of the east end with a huge garage or whatever that would look like. So, you know, with that in mind, that's where my mind goes, you know, and to spend the money that it takes to get us to a real good solution for you for 15 to 20 years. Because as we look at the big numbers, like the one that's on this CIP, we're talking about, you know, 30 years worth of population growth that we don't know if it'll happen. You know, that's the hard part for me, and where the heartburn comes in for me. I understand the idea of, hey, let's build a big new beautiful building that shares all its HVAC and all that stuff on the south end of town. But for me, that's just not realistic with what we've got on the agenda as a city. I mean, between flood and everything else that we're trying to do, I think we're much better off working within the current structure to make it everything we can for you, and then work through these other pieces to get fire and special ops taken care of. I guess, any comments on that? What do you think of that path?
I agree. I mean, obviously, there's a big price tag that comes with this, and so whatever the decision that's made has to fit the public. So whether it's a 15-year plan, what's clear is that something has to be done because there's a price tag that comes to not doing anything, and the building itself needs some TLC in any case. And we don't want to force money into a building that will potentially be remodeled. So so that's one of our concerns.
And again, I'll echo Mike's comments that I agree. I think no matter what, that building is going to have expenses with some of the, you know, the heating systems and all that stuff. So that is going to be, so whether or not we move out of there and then repurpose that for something else, those costs are always going to be there. So you might as well use it, in my opinion, get the building up to where it needs to be so that it's a functional building. And then if later on down the road we reorganize and special ops moves out, we have some reorganization within, you know, co-oping projects, I think that's the way to go. But for me, this price tag is too high. I think building new or anything else, I think, you know, getting this building up to stuff and taking care of the stuff we have is, you know, we already invested some costs into there with retaining wall and stuff like that. I think some of that justification is there even in those senses. We invested in that site, let's invest in the building.
Thank you. So, you know, I sat down with the committee when we worked with the EAPC, and part of the improvements that would have been considered at the current building included a squad garage, and I don't remember the dollar amount, and I think it's fairly easy to say that could probably be taken off of the price tag. Our police department is very used to having their vehicles outside, and so I'd be really curious to know what that amount was. But then also just priority-wise, if the investment's going to be made in that building, then I think we need to do it right. Because sometimes we've had, and I'll just quote Chief Kelly, you know, we've had thoughts of putting lipstick on a pig, and that's not right. This is our building. This is a working facility for our police department, and we need to do more than paint and put in carpet. We need to do it right. And obviously we'll have to have professionals that will help us determine what the best case scenario there is.
Okay, so just to kind of continue the thought, because this is one of those spots where I think if we have a consensus among us that we're sort of along the right lines, this is what they need, right? So is it, I see most of us nodding at least, is that, I feel, because to me, that progression that I talked about with getting a fire station to the south end of town, repurposing Fire Station 1 and working with the current building seems to me to be the most workable solution, at least money-wise and functionally going forward.
Yeah, I'll just echo that. I think, again, if it's useful just to give staff direction, or would it be beneficial to come in the form of a motion to direct staff to work on, you know, do we want to set a budget of $3 million? I'd look to Chief or Harold, you know, what can we go to EAPC with and say, hey, this is, what can we get for $3 million? What can we get for $5 million? You know, and that, including the infrastructure, like the bones of this building are what we need to worry about. It's the heating and cooling, and so all of a sudden it's the, you know, it's August 1st and it's 90 degrees outside, and you know, it's our AC units go down and stuff like that. We've got a $150,000 price tag on replacing some of that stuff. I'd like to get that stuff in order, so if it would be beneficial to come in form of a motion. I guess I'd like to see how we'd like that structured.
If I may. So I've asked the APC to prepare some numbers of using the building within its current footprint. What would they see as the costs necessary to buy another 10 to 15 years out of the building? I haven't received those costs yet, so while I'm supportive of the thought concept of, giving us a directive of $3 million, until I get those cost estimates back, I don't know what the proper amount will be at this point.
So I think what I hear is our general agreement that, the number that we're looking at is probably not realistic, and that there has to be some other attempts to do cooperative projects, work between fire department and police department, use existing facilities if they're going to be abandoned by the new fire station planning, that kind of thing. So I think everybody, I see everybody kind of nodding on that general, nodding about that general concept. So is that pretty much a consensus? So
Okay, next department, Jason's going to walk us through Public Works Utilities, which is where flood control goes.
What the next one is?
Yeah, we only have one item, so. Easy to overlook.
You're up.
As I mentioned, we do have the single item here. This is the fuel farm upgrade. Currently, right now, we're operating off of a 30-year lifespan for the current tanks that are installed on the ground. It was originally installed in 1995-96 timeframe, so we are approaching that 30-year timeframe. We recently did just have a failure of the diesel fuel system tank itself. It was mainly on the venting side of the house. Some corrosion basically ate away at the elbow joint, which ended up causing some intrusion of water into the system. We did have a workaround. We were able to, through a few agreements with local gas stations in the area, able to continue fueling operations, but it did create a strain. So what we're doing here is we would like to go ahead and take a look over the next 4 years, setting aside funds to go ahead and do an upright above ground replacement of the entire fuel system itself. That would be a dual tank system. So the current system right now operates about a 12,000 gallon tank, dual system for both gas and diesel. We would upgrade it to a 16,000 gallon tank, 2 tanks again, both above ground. DHS has recently done a survey, an assessment of the area as well, and they feel that this is one area that we could potentially apply for grant funding on, mainly on the net explosive weight and protective barriers around the fuel systems itself. So it could be an opportunity for cost savings there. Okay. Utilities.
All right, so the next group of projects, we're on the same sheet? Yeah. So the next group of projects are mainly flood control projects. So basically, those are pulled out of the PER update that the Bar Ackerman team is working on to kind of update the original PER back in 2012. So this is kind of the project schedule based on the latest PER, but then again, we're also limited by. Paul, can you come run my button? So we're limited by state funds, so originally our state, or the state funding was projected out of the House to be about 125 million. Went through the Senate, went down to about 65 million, 66 million. We met with the governor last Friday. We have, And I think we got some requests for information today as well, so I think they started conference committee maybe today or early next week. So, and the question was from Representative Swantek was, if we give you 125, what's it going to go toward? And they're really concerned about all the carryover funds. You know, they give us $125 million. It takes us 6 years to spend that money out. So there's a lot of carryover funds, and that concerns a few of the senators and representatives. So they're working through that in conference committee, but we have a good feeling that it's going to be more than 65. So basically, this entire list of projects here is all flood control and kind of based on our sequence going forward on building these projects out. So before I move on, any questions on flood control specifically, or? Does anybody want specific explanations for each individual project, or? Okay.
We'll get to see them when they're ready, right?
Definitely. All right, so the next group of projects would be into the sanitary sewer side of things. Like Lance mentioned, this is the $96 million wastewater treatment facility. So just a little background on this. So for the past almost 15 years that I've worked in public works, I've applied and worked with the state health department to get our five-year permit renewals done. So about 10 years ago, when we submitted, basically the word from DEQ at that time was, look, this might be the last time we permit a lagoon system, because we have some nutrient levels that there are some nutrients that we can't remove with our current treatment system. We'd have to go to mechanical. But it really depended on the EPA and how fast they advance some of their nutrient reduction stuff. So
I can't reach the short arms.
Thanks, Paul. So since then, they had it seemed like it really picked up a lot of speed. They had some stakeholder meetings across the state, but really for the most part, nothing. I don't see anything on the horizon. So we can handle this one of two ways. We can leave it in there as a placeholder that, hey, someday we might need to build a wastewater treatment facility and it's going to cost a lot of money, or we can just strike it out of the 5-year CIP. I don't anticipate needing to build this in the next 5 years, but there are things that could come up in the next 5 years that might drive us getting there too. So
just one question on that then. So, because that's kind of where my mind went, is what if we do know we need to do it, what does the lead time look like? And does it look like other stuff? Do we start with $2 million for engineering and then 3 years later we start with this? So, is it more appropriate to always keep a 5-year horizon on a $2.5 million engineering project rather than the full 96? Because even now, if we started in 5 years, it might be 110 anyway. Right? That number just isn't meaningful to me. The first step would be some other smaller piece, right? And I mean, you guys, this part of it's kind of your plan, but that's what comes to my mind.
Yes, and it could be, that's perfectly acceptable to do. We did a facility plan. When did we do the facility plan last? 14. So we have a general idea of what we need capacity-wise and things of that nature. We have a site for it. We own a quarter section of land to the north of the wetland, so that stuff, it's, and even the conveyance system to a future wastewater mechanical plant is there. We did that a few years ago with a project. So Yeah, we could put in a $5 million placeholder to begin engineering 5 years from now.
And it just always stays in the fifth year is what I'm thinking.
Yeah,
you know, 'cause
until
it-
something changes
Right.
every year. You know, we go through this exercise every year, and if something happens, then, you know, we just bring it ahead 3 years or something, so.
Jason, you want to go into water, then your TV done, otherwise you have to go in the store.
Oh, sure. What page is this?
City Hall from moving.
Yeah. I'm not coming
Yeah.
back. I'm not coming back.
And while he's looking for the next thing to talk about, just add in, it's a $90 million construction, I don't, there it goes. It's $90 million for construction, but the operational costs of a mechanical plant are significantly higher than a lagoon system, and those numbers aren't built in to this yet either.
Yeah, that's correct. I mean, I anticipate that we'd be creating an entire new department, new superintendent, foreman, operators. Yeah.
Would there be any cost share with like the state or anything like that on a mechanical plant or anything?
There's not a lot of grant funding for wastewater. I think there was a bill going through legislature this year to try to set up they call it a clean water state revolve. Like right now we have, what do we have now? We have drinking water, yes. So there's clean water SRF and drinking water SRF. They were looking at creating an additional state fund to fund some of these sanitary sewer projects because they don't really fit into any existing funding places.
Other municipalities across the state that have the lagoon system versus treatment plant?
We're the last major community with lagoons. West Fargo, they just abandoned theirs a couple years ago, so now they pump all of their wastewater to Fargo. But in the process, Fargo did about $125 million wastewater treatment upgrade to handle all that. Yeah, so these are big expensive projects, I guess is what I'm trying to say. But yeah, and right now, you know, there's nothing from DEQ or the EPA that says you can't use lagoons. Basically, we have a permit. It has limits of what we can discharge to the service river. As long as we can meet those limits, we're fine. So we'll continue to keep an eye on it and update you guys regularly. So the is David gonna talk or did Mark have something?
So I'm just trying to, you know, maybe articulate the sense of what I think I heard, which was that maybe we adjust this to whatever your best guess is on an engineering study that would come up at the time that we would get notification to start the process because our lagoons aren't ready to be certified again, as opposed to having this 96 million sitting there. And obviously there's a lot of unknowns into how all of that is going to evolve anyway. So, you know, all of the things that were mentioned. So, is that the general consensus of the council? Would you say?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm getting nods from everybody. So,
Just a real quick question, Jason. If this were a 20-year CIP, where would this be?
It really depends on population and limits. You know, I can't remember, Lance, from the facility study. Does handle about 75,000 people? I thought is, or was it maybe smaller than that?
Yeah. The current system that we have will top out around 55,000 PD. So when we get to that level, we'd almost be forced then to start looking at mechanical or expand the lagoon system, which I think that was where the state was kind of, well, I don't know if we're going to let you expand it. So it's either nutrients or population.
One of the things I think that we need to keep in mind, and I would like to see this hanging out there at some point as a reminder, because most likely what's going to drive the need for this is any type of economic development, primarily industrial projects that come in line that have a need for a lot of water, then we have to provide that in one of two ways, either through water that comes through the water plant. It'd be clean water coming through the water plant, but then we also have to deal with the discharge that comes away from that to the industrial water. One option is to have a mechanical treatment plant and use the water that comes out. The other side of the mechanical plant is industrial water to provide some of that need too. So most likely that is going to be the driving force that comes into play.
With that, like for funding for that, let's just say there is a project that comes in, industrial manufacturing project that comes in to finance, could like a TIF or something like that be used to help finance an improvement like that?
Something like that would be the best case scenario for this, because then we would be selling them water, and the rates that we would collect on the sale of that water would help fund for the plant. So that would be the best case scenario in this, is to get something like that to come through with the high demand that we could use to fund the treatment facility.
The only other caveat I would add, and that's an unknown trigger on all of this, is the DEQ administration and when they choose to enforce. And they're pretty hot on it 10 years ago. They've seemed to cooled off on it, but that can change at any time. And that would be the one caveat I would put in here. But they're going to typically work with you. As long as you're making progress towards compliance, they're typically going to give you time.
Yeah, to that point, Harold, we just got our second 5-year renewal since the order was given, 10 years ago. So again, things have kind of cooled down, and the guy that told us 10 years ago no longer works there, and nobody's even brought it up since then. So I don't go out of my way to bring it up as well. So. Okay, so moving on to the next group of projects would be, these are, other than the very last project, this would be all water main replacement projects. Jenna, I might need a reminder, why did we start putting these in the CIP?
You're increasing capacity.
Okay.
Water pipes.
Yeah, so it's a capital definition item. So historically, we budget, like right now in our budget, we have $2 million for water main maintenance. So we design a project, and we design it with city staff, bid it, award it, construct it. But these projects here are projects that we're seeking state DWR cost share on for water main replacement, and then we're piggybacking our local share with a SRF loan. So our idea is, if every year we're plugging $2 million into our budget for water main replacement, instead of just spending $2 million cash every year on a water main replacement project, let's leverage that toward leverage more money and use that $2 million as debt service. So we just started design on our second year of that. So we're doing about $10 million a year in water main replacement, and that gets us about, I think we got about 3 miles of pipe in last year. So we have, if anybody paid attention to the newsletter that the PIA puts out, so we have about 70 some miles of cast iron pipe in the ground still. So depending on bid prices and method of replacement, it's a $225 to $250 million issue, and it's you see it if you follow us on Facebook. It's not generally a matter of if, it's when. We have, we historically in the early 2020s we had 22, 23, 24 water main breaks. Last year we had 39. So we're starting to see now an escalation in breaks, which definitely concerns me, but we're trying to target areas that are worse than others, but it's very hard to do. We're trying to base what we're replacing on age of pipe. Sometimes we guess wrong, but we're just trying to target as much cast iron as we can every year.
So with that, Jason, so just quickly, that's like 25 years worth of work still, right, at 3 miles a year?
Yeah.
But also, what's the lifespan of what we're putting in now? Does this actually sort of end at some point, we go to regular maintenance, or is this the way it works? It's 10 million a year, we always just replace pipes.
You know, I think most of your manufacturers are saying that PVC is probably a 100-year design life. You know, so unless there's some major ground shifts or something like that, we very seldom. I'll take that back. If we have dug up areas where there's PVC installed, but usually it's a steel fitting. Not all the fittings are plastic like the pipe. So where we've put in a steel fitting, then those have rotted out. But water quality wise, PVC it's way better and much better longevity. So the very last project is the water and sewer building. So we went through that facility on the tour last year. So in the 2025 budget, there is, I think, about $250,000 to start looking at designing or at least doing a facility assessment on building a new water and sewer building. I haven't taken any action on that. I figured we would, you know, put it in here, and if council has a desire to let us look forward at that, then we would probably get an architect on contract this year to start looking at that, and then, you know, this could be programmed in, you know, next year or in other years down the road. But it's a little history of that building. I think that was moved on to the water and sewer facility back in about the 1980s, and it was moved in from somewhere else. So nobody knows exactly how old that facility is, but we've had it since about the 80s. Our crew is growing. I guess as you went through there's not a ton of space. We have people crammed pretty close together, and then the roof leaks all over. And there's something really weird up there's the roof is tied in with that. When you see it, there's we don't have a picture of it, but there's a green facade across the top, and that's all tied in with the structural roof somehow. So it's we haven't had any roofers that have successfully come in and tried to patch any of that stuff. So we could theoretically spend, you know, a bunch of money on, you know, trying to remove some of that roof and kind of reconstruct and get something that doesn't leak. Yeah. We still have a, you know, 50-plus-year-old building.
So just with that, Jason, I think, you know, for me as we toured it last year, it's apparent that you got to do something to shore it up, whatever we're going to do. But I guess to me the bigger picture question is do the staff that are operating out of that building need to be right there? And really the bigger picture then is what availability do we have in facilities all across the city, and where should they be? And, you know, do we group them up somewhere else that makes sense because we've already got space? Or is it important that they're, you know, 30 feet from where they work? I guess that's where my mind goes with that.
You know, it would probably make sense for them to be near that area. You know, I think there's 5 outbuildings with equipment, parts, pieces. So I think it's important that they're in proximity to that. You know, in that existing footprint, maybe not necessarily. You know, with the piece of property that we bought to the east, you know, we could theoretically move impound onto that lot, and then we would have a piece of property on 31st that we could basically move the water and sewer admin operation across the street. When we were looking at this last year, you know, basically what we had planned is that we would just demo that old building, and we would relocate those staff into like temporary construction trailers for a year or a summer, and then we would basically reorient that building so that the entrance is right off 31st, so that we don't have customers coming into our gated complex. We would have like a public entrance, and there would be room in that corner if we demo the old building.
Okay, and so that's kind of where my mind was going. Not so much, you know, should we build a different building somewhere else? Or, you know, does the Public Works building accommodate the people that work there now? You know, I don't know if you guys are completely full in there. I mean, are there options that way? Because if we're going to reconstruct, then I think, yeah, there's no question you do it right there, because that's where the stuff is. So if that makes sense.
Yeah, there's not room at our current public works building, and then we need a lab. We have an EPA certified lab, so we have to have the lab facility. And then, yeah, I think building in that location is probably the best idea that we've come up with.
Okay, so then with that, is the 2.5, is that what it'll take to build that building? Is that what that is?
That number's a guess, you know, based on X amount of dollars per square foot, you know, so the idea would be we'd get an architect on board this year, and we would do that, do the design, and then see kind of where we're at price-wise. You know, as you can see, like, I don't think we need a super fancy, you know, tip-up concrete building, which that drives up some of these costs sometimes. So when I start weighing different construction types, I don't know where this is gonna land.
Okay, and so I'm trying to scroll fast here to try to find what I'm looking for. So what would the funding source be for that building? Do you have?
It says utilities.
We would use utility reserves, probably.
Okay, which originally came from where? So from fees that came from utility bills?
Yep, yep.
Okay, and so, I mean, if I could for the council, I mean, this is another one that I think we could all agree, boy, we better do it, right? Like, we want people working in an environment that works, but we've got to weigh that against, you know, Chief Kelly's fire station. That is the same kind of concept. Let's get a better building that better suits to what the people actually need on the streets. And so I don't know how we prioritize that. I don't know that I have a good thought in my mind that says, hey, this one should be above this one, or what priority we need to give each of these pieces, you know, with the finite resources that we work with. And so I don't know if there's others that have thoughts on that or discussion, but you know, I'd rather not leave people in a leaking building, but how does that fit the overall structure?
What's the footprint of this building, roughly, Jason?
I think this would, I think the number here, I think this is based on about 7,500 square feet.
You know, we said this building was moved on there before. Is there any other, you know, flood acquisitions? You know, we've seen that in the past where an opportunity might be presenting itself at some point for us to acquire a building and move it in there, you know, for flood protection.
Nothing that I'm seeing on the near horizon. You know, I think it was something we learned. You know, moving like a pole building for storage for flood control probably has a lot of utility and makes sense. I think we learned from the traffic building is you may have a 7,500 square foot shell that looks like a great place, but then when you start bringing architects in it has to meet current day code compliance, and that number gets really expensive really fast. So it's almost a horse a piece of remodeling versus building new.
And maybe more for you, Paul, I mean, what, numbers wise for a 7,500 square foot, I assume, commercial building, the lab is probably expensive, but outside of that, what are we, is that in line, 2.5 million? That seems high to me, but I mean, it seems like 800 is where my mind would go, but I don't know.
And I could say 2.5. I think you can make justification depending on what goes into it. 2.5, you know, what's there for infrastructure, what types of finishes, you know, what level of finishes, you talk about concrete and all that stuff. 2.5 with today's construction costs, that could be low.
Okay.
Again, when we say a guess, this is absolutely a guess. So maybe this is one of those things where we fund it to start the process. We start to see some engineering or planning or design come into it, so that way maybe for next year we at least have a schematic of what it's going to look like. You know, having some information, I think, is probably beneficial before we really put the cart before the horse and just dive in.
So if we did do that instead, if we sort of authorize that kind of thinking, it might move that number to the a year out, is do some engineering or architectural work this year. If we did that, is that gonna be good for a while? If we couldn't fund it that year and it was gonna be 2 out, the upfront architectural work, I would think would be pretty good for whenever we do something, right?
Yeah, that type of thing doesn't usually have a shelf life on it, so. Unless something would drastically happen where in the next 5 years we we grow and we have to add staff and we need a bigger building, but I don't foresee that happening here, like in the 5-year horizon that we're looking at.
And so just to finish the thought too, I mean, right now, we've got this in 26. I mean, is it a better thought anyway to give it that 1 year? Because we don't have, you said though you do have engineering dollars this year, is that right?
I do.
And is that what you need to get that part done?
I'm hoping so.
Okay.
We'll go through, we'll go, this is super convenient.
Yeah, it works great.
We'll do the RFQ, get an architect on board, and then see if we can get a full design for 250,000 would be my, and if I need more, we'll have that conversation before we enter into a contract.
Sorry, I hit mine before.
All right, thank you. So if we are setting priorities, I'm going to be very clear. I don't think it'll come as a surprise to anyone, but I think the police department, renovation, new build, however it is my top priority. It's been on the list for a long time, and we've kind of pushed it down and pushed it down and pushed it down. Sometimes because it probably is the most expensive project that we have to look at, but it is well overdue, and I think that's where our attention needs to go before any other project.
Thank you. I was just going to ask Jason and Lance. So that building is roughly 7,500 square feet. And is it like the one you're looking to build? Is that accurate?
Yeah.
And Lance, what numbers were you guys running as like a price per square foot to come up with the 2.5 million roughly? You guys, I mean, do you know a number off the top of your head, either one of you?
That's your
Because commercial real estate, and again, this is just like a cinder block type building, right? It should be right around $200, $210 a square foot, give or take. So we would be in that $1.5 million range as far as the price of this building roughly. Oh, gosh, sorry, I keep forgetting that.
Undo it. That 200 or 225 a square foot, that number seems to wander around a lot on us, depending on who we talk to. So I think the number that Lance and his people put together for the traffic facility, we kind of use those numbers. But so I'm hoping we're high, but you just don't know.
Go ahead.
I think in talking about the prioritization, because I think we're on the right track with this particular piece. But I guess in following Alderman Olson's train of thought and actually Alderman Glassman as well. And the other piece of this prioritization thing is, are there funds available? I mean, so for instance, can we take money out of the public works or utility reserves and use them to fix the police station problem? I guess that's a question.
Yeah, two different things.
Yeah. So, that has to be borne in mind as we're trying to wrangle through this stuff. Somebody else had a comment?
Yeah. Well, and I'll just ask him, Dave. You can maybe just answer directly then. So, is that the right way to think of this? That if we just said, hey, we got to figure out police department in this building, are they different sources of funds, and you guys would be looking at them different anyway? So, overall, we got to make this all work, but is that the right way to think of it?
It definitely both completely different sources of funding. The police department building, if we were going to go with the new building, $75 million, we don't have $75 million of reserves, so it would be some type of bonding or coming up with funding from some other source to support that. And keeping in mind that we would need that secured up front to begin the contract.
Okay, and something just for Harold and for Dave together, I look at these reserves that Jason's using as this funding source. I kind of feel like that's what it's there for, right? I mean, that's why we collect the fees. That's why we collect the fees from the consumers, is to make sure we're providing an overall system that works to provide clean water and take away the bad water from their house, right? That's the whole idea. And so with that in mind, in some ways, I sort of want to defer a little bit to staff on that, because you know the picture of what you've got coming. And if this meets that priority level and it's using that funding source, that makes sense to me. And it's, while I understand these, I'm on the same boat, but I think that puts it into a separate category. It might, you know, the police department's probably the top of our levy category for sure. Yeah.
Just kind of in response to that, in communities I've been in where we've commissioned a rate study, typically one of the factors that we include in projecting out the appropriate rates is what are your future investments that you have to do to maintain infrastructure, whether that's replacing your current infrastructure or expanding your infrastructure. Those should be built into your rates so that you have cash on hand to make those improvements when those come up. So Alderman Blessum and I would agree that yes, your rates should be structured enough to help address future needs as those arise. And it should be planned out somewhere like what we do with the airport with their plans and those kinds of things. You have a CIP, and that's the importance of the CIP project, is we start laying out these priorities for the future, because that may be a factor into your rate studies of what appropriate water and sewer rates should be.
And I will also add, like the airport, we have lease agreements with like the airlines and stuff, and the cost of maintaining the runways and the airport facilities is also built into things like their landing fees and the terminal rents and things like that, based off of the existing lease agreements and future lease agreements.
Scott?
So I agree, Lisa, that I think the police department has to be a priority. I'm going to differ a little bit with everyone on how we go about this. I think we do have to have probably an architect involved with it, but I would like them to get with the group at the police department that has been kind of looking over the building on what they need. I believe that a lot of it on the new part that was put in there was a bunch of other people saying what we need and what we need for the future. It's the police department, it's the guys working down there, they're the ones that are gonna know what they need. And that's why I just don't think we spend a bunch of money just on some expert to tell us what we need. Those guys are the experts. So I think we need to keep that in mind, because I think that group has worked pretty well on stuff that they've talked about they need. And I just think we need to keep that in mind. And the other thing is spending a ton of money on that building. If we're looking at 10 years, it doesn't make any sense to spend $15 million on that building if it's only going to be for 10 years. So we need to keep that in mind too.
If I may, just to kind of recap a little bit of the process that we went through APC, there was a lot of police department participation in that process. The police department picked who was going to represent that, and there was multiple levels of that. And I would say the vast majority of the panels that were going through that process that EAPC was working with directly to identify needs and approaches was predominantly the police department. And I'm not sure if it went all the way down to the specific patrol officer level, but upper level management and mid-level management were all involved in that process. And again, it was majority police department more than anybody else. So.
Yeah, so the one who really spearheaded and we are looking at different things. We were looking at using the current space that we have available to us to get by, whereas EAPC looked at a lot of renovation and a lot of extra building onto the building and so forth. So they're not really apples for apples, but Jared Foley was the one who did our temporary space usage, and he was heavily involved in the other one as well. I think that anything that we decided to do should involve an architect for sure, because if we do go the route of having our officers or having the the process that we came up for the temporary, space usage. We're not architects and we don't know whether it will actually work. We believe it will, but we need somebody to tell us it will, so that is definitely something we need.
And I guess my final statement on that too is, I'm in support of a lot of these projects. I believe that staff bring us projects that are necessary. It's easier to fund them when there's a funding source. So when there's dollars coming in through fees and payments and things, obviously the decisions are a little bit easier. The police department, the fire department aren't in that same situation. So then it does fall on us to find the funding sources to make sure that they are also working in adequate facilities that meet their needs and meet the needs of the public.
Okay. One last department, and then any closing questions or comments, and we can be done for today. So the engineering department assists Public Works with stormwater capital improvements. So the maintenance side of the house is within their department. We get involved primarily because the storm sewer capital is special assessed. Or it turns into a very large construction project like our puppy dog cooling project that just kicked off. So we help them quarterback that. If you look at the city's stormwater management plan, which lists all of the capital infrastructure needs for all of our stormwater basins in the city, we really only have one project left that hasn't had any engineering or construction yet, and that's the 11th Avenue watershed, basically from Broadway over to 6th Street. It's one of our larger watersheds within the city, very susceptible to flooding just because there's no inlet capacity on this roadway. There is some existing storm sewer about mid-block on the roadway. Our Public Works Department said that's starting to collapse and fail. And then also with this project, because of the age of the infrastructure on 11th Avenue, this is all 1950s cast iron and vitrified clay sanitary sewer. It's in that same age bracket that's susceptible to failing. With that project, since we have the road tore up, we would then replace utilities. Because we're replacing all 3 utility lines, there's really no pavement left. So that would be an opportunity then for the city to reconstruct that roadway. If you walk along the roadway now and you look at things like the curb and gutter and the sidewalk, they're all starting to fail as well. So there'd be multiple plans of attack for this project. We would fund the storm sewer improvements in the traditional method, which is half special assessed in the watershed. The storm sewer development would pay for the other half. And then we would use obviously oil and gas funds and some water and sewer reserves for the street utility improvements. So this project, as currently laid out, design would start in 2027 with a 2029 construction timeline. Last project on here is one that has recently come up, brought to us by some constituents that live in southeast Minot. And you've probably seen a little bit of action on this through the Ward County Water Resource Board. They just bought some property where this, we call it a canyon, because that's really what it is. But there's been some very severe erosion that's happened over in this area. And eventually all this erosion ends up in the river, which creates another problem that we have to address. But they're taking care of some of this erosion now, but really the problem starts up by the top of the hill by Wesley's Truck Stop. And this is one of the city's major outfalls for southeast Minot. So it's over 150 acres of urban drainage and probably about the same amount of rural drainage that all wants to go down this coulee. And the soils are susceptible to erosion, and people are starting to lose property because of it. So at this point, what I would recommend doing is starting with some design so we can get a handle on exactly what the best approach is. This is really rugged terrain. It's very steep. I've walked it. It's going to be a hard improvement to construct and to locate, and so we're probably going to need some options available to us that can check all these boxes for long-term maintenance and taking care of this problem. So what I put in here right now are very high level cost estimates for design and construction. My thought would be is to start getting some engineering done, seeing what we can come up with, and then phase a construction project someday in the future when budget allows. So those are the two future CIP projects. Currently we have a Puppy Dog Coulee project that's just getting underway, like I mentioned. The Polaris Park project, which is up in northeast and northwest Minot, that is stuck in permitting right now with the Corps of Engineers. So there's a lot of moving parts with that. That project got very complicated because of some of those components, and we're waiting to hear back from what the Corps is or will not let us do on that project. So once we have some answers on that, we're going to have to bring that back to you and see if we want to move forward with that project, if it's a special assessment project, if it's a city-only finance project. That would be the largest special assessment district by area the city's ever done. It'd be almost 2,000 properties would have a special assessment bill, which is significant. So that's one that when we bring this back, we'll have to have more discussion. You have to take any questions on the storm sewer cap.
So Lance, back to 11th Avenue. So with the way that that's laid out, is it right to think that everybody along those streets are the properties that will be impacted by the specials that would come from that?
The picture is a little bit deceiving, Alderman Blessing, because the streets highlighted in red are the streets that would have actual storm sewer infrastructure installed. However, the district boundary is significantly larger. It's I know it's over 50 acres, and it goes all the way up to 16th Avenue, and it's just basically a big bubble or circle around that infrastructure.
And I think I've thrown this out to you in one of our talks on this. My mind, especially when I think of something like 11th Avenue, where 40% of the city could drive on that street today. I mean, that's a very heavily trafficked street. And so for me to think, we should spread the work done on that street just to that bubble doesn't quite make sense to me. To me, it almost feels like the entire community should share a street of that size. Maybe even the same thing with 6th. And I don't know if that works. I don't know if the concept that comes to my mind even is fair or works, but that I just kind of wanted to say it because I think that's the way where my mind goes on a lot of this stuff is when we're, as an entire community, when we're talking about these big arteries, I feel like we all share that, right? And then as we go into the smaller and smaller and smaller streets, maybe specials can make sense then. But I don't know if there's a comment to that or maybe just me saying what my piece.
No, there is, and that's all fair. And I think if you rewind all the way to the early 2000s when they set up the storm sewer utility, there's two components of that. There's the maintenance component and then there's the development component, right? And so the development component was the city's attempt to do exactly what you're saying, is everyone's kind of kicking into the fund to help take care of some of these impaired drainage basins because the community would have the entire community would have the benefit to that. But you also have to recognize that when these subdivisions were put in, for whatever reason, the city's infrastructure policy back then was to not put in things like sidewalks or storm sewers or street lighting, and now we're paying a penalty for it, right? It's 5 times more expensive to put that infrastructure in now than if it would have been put in up front. So I think, from what I've been told, is when they started that utility, they knew this was going to be expensive. I think the council or the city management at that time knew that it wouldn't be fair now to come and put that entire cost on that district because it essentially wasn't their fault. I think that was their way of trying to get at what you were describing. Now, whether we want to keep going down that road of the 50-50 or change to something else, that's a council policy direction that we would need. Right now, this project is set up with the existing policy that we have in place.
And it, to a certain extent, is trying to do that.
Correct. So, those were all the projects that are included in our CIP. Obviously, it takes 2 hours to get through all that. Thanks for bearing with us and with the some of the mic issues we're having. I hope this was helpful. I hope you took more out of this than just one of us trying to stand in front of a podium at a council meeting for 10 minutes and trying to get through this. It's important for us to help you, to give you the context and the background on these projects so you have a good understanding of why they're being presented to you before council may eliminate or move or adjust the funding.
Lance?
Turn mine up.
If we don't take anything else away from this meeting, we will remember the mic system.
Is there a capital project for
I just want to comment that, Lance, I think this is helpful, and to give us a bit more depth than we would have by trying to go through this by ourselves or by getting it at the podium in a meeting that doesn't provide the time to really review it. So I think it's been helpful, and it's a good addition to the process that, because we have this every year and we need to deal with it. So I think it's helpful.
Robbie, you're still on hold. Thank you. I'm going to echo Mark. I think this was really a good sit down. I like the format and how we went over things. One thing I didn't see, and maybe would be more helpful to us, I know there's a lot of projects in this list, but what is the city's priority? Like, what are your top 5 projects you guys want to see done from the city's point of view? I think that would help us as well to maybe understand and digest a little bit about which way we should go or where we should spend the money this year instead of in 2 years or whatever else. So, it's off. Yeah.
Just to add one thing too to what they're saying, the part I think I was missing from today, this is fabulous, I think it's a great step. The part that I'm missing is, are we even close to covering what you guys have in here? Right, I think that these two things have to come together and meet at some point in the future, right? Dollars wise, and so that's the part that I think I'm missing. So, and we'll get that obviously as we go through the rest of the process here. But in some ways it feels a bit like a wish list. But if it's merging with the dollars we think is coming, if it's on track to merge with the dollars, then I think we're on track.
And to both of your points. You're correct. And I think that was the part that we were trying to get at here late in the process, where we're trying to add a process onto what we're already doing to help prioritize those top 5-10 projects. Part of the difficulty is you have multiple different funding sources or things that they're already in motion. For instance, the fall every year we come in front of you and say, here's a list of DOT related projects we think we can fund and we can program. Once we get that direction from council, we have to submit that to the state, and then they start programming those dollars. Jennifer has the same sort of thing with the FAA. So sometimes with some of these types of projects and the type of funding they have, we're locking some of these projects in. And that's part of what's driving the CIP sometimes, right? Once we've made that commitment, if we now turn around and tell the feds, well, we don't want that funding source anymore, they would take that away. But then that really sets us back of trying to get that project approved. So we're going to try to build a process for next time that helps to do just that, where we can try to condense this down a little bit and say, here's our top 5 or 10, or here's what can fit into the budget in 26 and 27. Right now, it's hard to do that. So yes, some of these projects listed in the CIP are somewhat of a wish list, or maybe they're an unfunded type of project like the wastewater treatment plant. So we have to make sure as staff that we are educating you on which projects are like that, which ones can float, which ones are, we have to do these now because we have an immediate problem.
since I'm always the doomsday guy, I just want to paint the picture before we leave, doing some quick math on this. What we have in the 2026 CIP that is being funded with sales tax, and I stripped out flood control because that has its own dedicated sales tax. So what's in here would require about 48% of a penny. Right? Currently, what is available for any of these projects, if 100% of it was allocated, is 49%. 49% of a penny. So it would consume all of what's available to fund what's in the CIP. However, if we look back in the 2025 budget and look at some things that were funded using these portions of sales tax, it includes things like 5 police cars, a thermal imaging camera, another fleet vehicle, pavement markings, survey drone, street patching and bike path repairs, a backhoe tractor, library books, a roof replacement, security cameras, street maintenance of 2.5, well, that's flood control. And then we get to the other penny and we have street improvements for $4.75 million. So the point being is there's not enough sales tax to fund everything that is in this CIP. That's where we have to come with a priority. And if we move an item from 26 to a future year, then that pushes something from a future year down the line. And that's where what's the highest priority? That's what we have to decide.
Anything else? Going once? Going twice? We're adjourned.
Thanks for all the help.
Yeah, you're a great assistant.
It took you a while to pass the candy. It took you a while. We were speaking the whole time.
Like program, like just stay on.
Are these the same ones?
Yeah, you can approve them.
These are built in.
Straight out of the box.